There we go, on two legs, tall and upright, proud. Did we just climb out of the darkness of the past to the brilliant daylight of awareness? Were these our mothers who gave us the life we so cherish?
Here in the old river gravel, Mr. Charles Dawson, F.S.A., found the fossil skull of Piltdown Man, 1912-1913. Now, man has always been interested in the problem of where he came from. Modern man is just the same as ancient man in that respect. My little daughter, as soon as she began to wake up to awareness, about 1 or 2 years old, her first question was, "Daddy, where did I come from?" How would you answer that one? Now, the materialists and biologists have said that man has developed by evolution from animals, and the effort has been to find the missing links between animals and man. Today one speaks less of missing links, one speaks of common ancestors. There was necessary, of course, for the proof and fortification of the evolutionary theory, evidence required. And where no evidence was forthcoming, some scientists, with a turn perhaps for humor, invented the evidence. And here you see how they invented the evidence of an intermediary stage between man and the apes in the Piltdown skull. The Piltdown skull was a man's skull, and the jaw was a prepared ape's jaw. Now, that served for 35 years as a so-called intermediary state until it was discovered by people working at the British Museum that it was an ape jaw coupled with a human skull and was a deliberate hoax. There have been other things of the same sort, Nebraska man, but we don't want to go into the fake evidence today. We want to go into the evidence candidates for real intermediates between man and the animals.
Everywhere in the world, people have been trying for years to find conclusive evidence to prove man's evolution from the animal kingdom. At first, people thought that Neanderthal man was a good candidate for the missing link. But today, everyone is convinced that Neanderthal man was completely human. One of the best known candidates today is found in Africa. The year is 1959. The place is the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. In the burning sun, Mary and Louis Leakey at long last find what they are looking for. For 28 years, they dug for fossils in these areas, and then they discover the remains of what they call Australopithecus. In 1974, farther north in Africa, Donald Johansen finds the bones of another Australopithecus specimen and names the skeleton Lucy. These creatures are labeled as ancestors of man, mainly because it is claimed that there are some human similarities in their jaws and teeth. The orthodontist Dr. John Cuozzo has investigated these claims for many years. His results are not very encouraging in our search for missing links.
What I have here is a display of upper and lower jaws. The lower jaws being in the first row and the upper jaws being in the second row. They're called mandibles and maxillas, technical term. What I've tried to show is the range of human variability. This range is measured by taking two wires and lining them up along the ridges of the teeth. And you could line up the wires like this and then measure the angle right up there. That angle is measured. This one turns out to be 67 degrees. Now, we follow this all the way around the curve here, and we see at the end of the curve, practically parallel arches, there is a rather parallel set of teeth. This belonging to a human as well, as all these are patients of mine, or have been at one time. This little girl has a 10 to 12 degree angulation between the two rows of her lower teeth. This compares to this chimpanzee, juvenile chimpanzee lower jaw, very closely. As you can see, they are very much alike and very similar. By looking at this, then, many have attempted to say that you can specify each individual species by these angles. I say the human range of variability is so wide that it makes it very difficult finding an upper or a lower jaw to then extrapolate and say you have a specific species. So therefore, when I do see a skull, for instance, like Australopithecus, which has the configuration of a ape in the skull portion, while many of the teeth look very human-like, I do not attempt then to categorize species by teeth or species by arch form, be it hominid or true man or monkey or ape.
Was Australopithecus one of the forefathers of modern man? Let's go to London and hear what an authority on supposed ape-man fossils has to say about that. Malcolm Bowden.
A number of measurements were made on these Australopithecine bones, and they were compared by a computer with those of apes and with human beings, Homo sapiens. And each time, the measurements came out so very much closer to those of apes than they did to those of human beings. And in fact, Oxnard, who did this experiment and made these measurements, came to the conclusion that he doubted if there was any link with the Australopithecines and that of Homo specie. Now this was supported by the work of Sir Solly Zuckerman. He carried out a number of examinations and tests and measurements of these Australopithecine bones, and he said that the Australopithecine link is based not on hard facts, but on speculation.
The evidence clearly shows that Australopithecus was just an extinct variety of ape, and nothing more. The name Australopithecus, in fact, means southern ape. Children play. Clay is shaped into fantastic forms. With felt pens and crayons, they design and draw beautiful things. And when they become grown-ups, they still design and draw business contracts and blueprints for beautiful houses. They create and build huge cities in which they live with thousands upon thousands of their neighbors. Their technical genius can apparently do anything, even fly higher and faster than the birds themselves. Homo sapiens, modern man. Where did he come from? Beside the findings of Australopithecus in Africa, in Tanzania by the Leakeys, and in Ethiopia by Johansen, other remains exist of a species that was once thought to be an intermediate between man and the apes, Homo erectus.
Some fossils discovered near Pekin between 1920 and 1940 were classified as Pithecanthropus pekinensis, but these were later renamed as Homo erectus. What was discovered was about 14 skulls, or fragments of skulls mainly, only 5 of which was there sufficient that they could reconstruct in order to find out the brain capacity. This picture shows one of the more complete of the skulls. This is skull number 11, and here you can see the plaster that was used between the broken pieces. This particular skull was added to here with some face bones a few feet away. The skull was completely reconstructed, and this jaw came from a part of the excavation 80 feet further up. On that basic skull was modelled the face of a woman, and they called the skull Nellie. Now, this picture and this reconstruction are the ones which received the great publicity. But how many people, I wonder, realise that it was all based upon a skull very badly broken and reconstructed like this?
Not only are the skulls reconstructed on the basis of just a few fragments, but the more or less human faces are the result of an artist's imagination. When the artists have some ape bones, they usually try to make the reconstruction look as man-like as possible, to give them that special look that makes them seem to fit very nicely into the evolutionary scheme. Similarly, when they have human bones, they have often used artistic freedom to make the reconstruction look as ape-like as possible. It is impossible to tell how much hair a person had by looking at his bones. Even a complete skull cannot tell us the exact shape of the nose, the eyes, the lips, or the ears. In addition to the ape-like skull fragments found near Peking, China, researchers also found the remains of modern man and of fire. What does that mean for Peking man?
The fire, the quartz, and the bones all indicate that human beings inhabited the Pekin site. And when these men went out on forays into the forest to find meat, they would kill antelope and reindeer and whatever else was there and bring it back to the cave for meat. They would cut up the meat and throw the remains onto the fire. Now, if they caught a monkey's meat is too tough to eat. So they would lop off its head, bring it back to the cave, and there cook it. When it was cooked, they would smash open the skull to get at the brains inside, which were a delicacy, and then the broken pieces of the skull they would toss onto the fire, mixed up with the other animal bones, which is where they were found. And perhaps several hundred years later, the experts appear to have come along, and when they find these bones of apes, they have put them together in a reconstruction and claim that they have found another missing link, Pekin man.
Too bad. Nellie's beautiful features are just those of an extinct ape. Let's examine some other attempts to find connections between man and ape. Scientists in Oklahoma have observed Washoe, a chimpanzee, by the modern means of television for more than 10 years. It appeared to be possible to teach Washoe quite a bit of sign language. By using her hands or head, She can tell her observers that she wants a strawberry or an apple, that she's thirsty, and many more things. As a result, some people have drawn the conclusion that this is an indication that apes do have the capability of speech, but that they are only lacking the muscles in their throat. Now, it is a well-known fact that animals can be taught a certain pattern of behavior. Take this sheepdog, for instance. Listening to the whistles of his master, he guides the flock wherever the shepherd wants him to. But is a learned reaction to certain signs a real indication of the brain's capacity for coherent thought and speech? Definitely not. The gap between man and animal is too big to bridge.
The grand difficulty is that there is a large hiatus between man and animals. Man has a computer which controls his language, and he has a speech center in his brain, which an animal doesn't have. Many people will protest when you say things like that, for an animal can learn a vocabulary. A dog can learn the whistles of the shepherd and react according, and they can communicate with one another like it. But a dolphin can also learn sign language. An ape, Washer, for example, in America, has learned, they say, a sign language. An animal can learn a vocabulary, but he can't learn grammatical language, and that's the great difficulty, because it needs a very, very complex computer to do that. And there are no intermediate stages have been found which would fit in to man being a speaking animal and an animal not being able to speak. The gap is very great. But all the same, one is still looking for intermediates between animals and man in scientific circles today.
In the deep cellars of the Museum of Natural History at Leiden in the Netherlands, a treasure is kept in a safe. Fossil bones found by a Dutchman, Eugene Dubois. The story goes like this.
When Darwin produced his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859, there was no fossil evidence at all that linked man with the apes. Now, Eugene Dubois went out to the Far East in the 1880s, and he told his colleagues that he was going out there specifically to find the missing link. He eventually arrived in Java, and there he found two very human-like skulls known as the Wajak skulls, but they were so human that he could not use those at all. In 1891, he found a skull, and a year later, 15 meters away, he found a very human-like leg bone. Eventually, Dubois decided that the leg bone belonged with the skull cap, and that he had found an upright walking ape, and he named it then Pithecanthropus erectus. Here we have his skull cap, and here we have the leg bone. Now, what really were they? It was generally accepted that this leg bone was very human indeed, but there was considerable debate about the skull cap. When he returned and published his results, saying that he'd found the missing link, the upright walking ape, there was a great deal of publicity and a great furor over what he found. But all the time that he was giving these lectures, he didn't at any time mention these earlier skulls that he'd found, the Wajak skulls. He kept those skulls secret for 30 years and told nobody about them at all. And it wasn't until 1920 that he released to the scientific world the fact that he had discovered them. This, of course, caused great consternation, because if he'd have shown those two very human skulls at the same time that he showed his Java man, nobody would have accepted these bones as being those of a half-man, half-ape, because he had at the same time, in similar dated strata, found these very human bones. Later, he did admit, just a few years before he died, that all he had found was the skull cap of a giant gibbon.
Some fragments of an extinct giant gibbon on Java. Remains of a southern ape, Australopithecus, found in Africa. Like the findings of the Leakeys and of Johansen, who called his Ethiopian Australopithecus Lucy. All on one table, these and other discoveries of this kind are the main result of our search for man's missing links.
All the fossil fragments that we have looked at so far, I would consider all as apes. And that would include the Australopithecines, Pekin man and Java man, which are now classed as Homo erectus, and Johansen's finds in Ethiopia. All just simply apes.
But has any evidence ever been found to indicate that human beings and these extinct apes lived at the same time? Professor Wilbert Rush has studied this question for many years.
It would seem that as we find more fossils, at least so far, what seems to also be happening is that we find man consistently appearing parallel with all of his supposed ancestors. The concept of man developing from these subhuman forms is simply very dubious and cannot be held. Instead, we've got parallel development. We've got a record of man consistently existing at the same time as his ancestors as far back as we go with these supposed human and definitely human forms.
Here we see the various claimed missing links. Here they are positioned at their approximate relative depths in the geologic column. Yet if we inquire further, we find that in each case, these supposed ape men could not be the ancestors of man. For modern man, Homo sapiens, already existed. Not only did man live at the same time as Homo erectus, but human fossils and artifacts have also been found in strata that has much the same placement as Homo habilis and Australopithecus. The same is true of Ramapithecus. It seems increasingly obvious that none of these creatures could have been ancestors of mankind, for man already existed. Our children are frequently told there is abundant evidence that man evolved from ape-like ancestors. They are shown imaginative pictures which claim to depict exactly how these supposed ancestors looked. But what are the facts? Did man evolve? If he did, there seems to be no evidence of it in the fossil record. The missing links between man and apes, like the supposed links between all animal and plant groups, are still missing. As far as we can tell from the evidence, man has always been man, and apes have always been apes. Failing to find fossil facts to support an ape-man transition, anthropologists have turned instead to a new field of research called molecular taxonomy. These researchers have found that the chromosome banding and some of the blood proteins of humans and chimpanzees are quite similar. Does this fact suggest common ancestry? Not necessarily, for there is more than one logical way to interpret such similarities. It would certainly be logical for a creator to use similar designs for structures meant to serve similar purposes. Moreover, chromosome numbers, which should be related to evolution if anything was, show no evolutionary patterns whatsoever. The number of chromosomes does not relate to any sort of reasonable ascending evolutionary order. In addition, it should be pointed out that the molecular similarities between apes and humans have often been rather exaggerated. A molecular examination of even a single drop of blood reveals many clear and obvious differences. Man is undeniably unique in this world. He is tremendously different from any animal. Homo sapiens, modern man, created as a perfect being, he slowly descends into the darkness. But still, his uniqueness is clear. It is clear especially in his power to create. And that creativity, apart from all the dissonance that has crept in, is perhaps the best evidence that man was created in the image of God. Man and ape, certainly a resemblance in form, but not necessarily related. Professor Wilder Smith.
Now, all the evidence we have on hand at the moment points to the fact that we have extinct and extant apes, or we have extinct or extant men. We have intelligent apes and we have less intelligent apes, and the same can be said for man. But never the twain shall meet. They are apes and remain apes, and man remains man. Now, if you go into a zoological garden and stand in front of the chimpanzee cage, you'll find people standing there and laughing at them because they see the resemblances. There are homologies there. But don't let's be deceived by homologies, because likenesses can come just as easily from the fact that a common creator made them all. And I personally believe that the genes, which are the blueprints which made the various kinds and species, can only arise from a creator who made them all, and therefore the resemblances or homologies which we do in fact find in biology today.